Ahoy! Today's video is going to be about something that almost every player uses all the time in their dungeons, but from what I've noticed, the vast majority of them don't understand how luring monsters works. By that I mean things like how enemies will approach you when they attack, how they follow you around, who they go after initially, and so on. So first of all, every enemy has something I call detection range and attack range. Detection range defines the area within which they will notice you and start attacking you. Attack range defines how close they have to be to hit you. Basically, if an enemy is aggressive and the level difference between you and the enemy is less than 100 levels, it will go after you if you enter its detection range. When that happens, it will have to get into attack range to actually hit you. Before we get into details, a little explanation on the mechanics of the game in that sense. Imagine a grid paper from your high school physics lessons. You stand right here. Normally, enemies occupy one tile each, but certain situations, especially bugs and server lags, can override that. But that's abnormal, so for the sake of understanding the example, they will each occupy one tile and no other can enter the same one. So if the enemy has melee range, it has to come right next to you to hit you. That means it will move to one of the 8 tiles that are available around your character. If there are more than 8 enemies in range, they will start doing their wandering around animation until they can engage too. Now, enemies cannot stack on the same tile, but you have the freedom to walk to a tile even if it's already occupied. So if you take one step left, 3 more tiles will be available, to which the rest of the monsters will race to. Or you can use dash to move 2 tiles, in which case there will be 5 spots available. So it's pretty simple for enemies with melee range. Trouble is if the enemies have a longer range. In that case, if they move towards you, they will typically choose a distance that is shorter than their maximum attack range. So if an enemy can hit you from 7 tiles away, it will move to something like 3 or 4 tiles away from you. This is the annoying part because it means they will scatter around in a large area, and to hit them more effectively you want them as tightly packed as possible. However, there's a little trick to fool them and force them to move to melee range. Remember how I said you have the freedom to move to a tile that's already occupied but they don't? Turns out if you do just that, they'll get confused and come closer to you. Whether this is a bug or a feature nobody knows, but it's been around since the first days of Cabal, so yeah. All you have to do to lure ranged enemies to a tight cluster is to step onto the tiles that are already occupied. Here I'd like to note that monsters in this game are very polite and they don't try to push each other around. So if one of them already decided to call dibs on a spot, the others consider that one taken even if that one is still walking towards the spot. Or crawling or floating or whatever. This can be very useful in Glacius Inferno, for example. I already know that the Ice Guardian is going to move to this exact spot, so I stand there too. So this tile is taken and all the ranged enemies will come to the 8 tiles around me then. And if you already see them running to fill the rest of the tiles, you can safely walk to a tile that one of them is already galloping towards. And the rest will see it occupied, so they'll come to take the other spots around and so on. Basically, you can walk around in a spiral, a very square-shaped spiral, and they will all get into a tight cluster around. There are cases where the enemy's attack range is the same or close to the same as their detection range. In that case, they will immediately attack you as you get within their detection range. If you have skills with longer range, you can just hit them and they'll walk towards you, but what can you do if you're not a force archer who can snipe enemies from miles away? Well, every class has access to certain skills with ranges up to 8 or 9, and it's useful to keep at least one of those handy. But what if they still can attack and won't move even if you hit them from range 9? Well, here's the second trick I want to show you. Wait until that enemy starts its idle animation, in other words, as it starts walking around without a care for the world. Go and hit it with your skill, then run out of its attack range, but not so far that it's too lazy to follow. Wait a second and it starts moving towards you. Simple as that. Now let's combine that with the previous lesson, shall we? Hit the enemy, then run to a spot that's already occupied by another enemy. And there you go, it also comes within melee range of you. Congratulations, you've just tricked the enemy's archer to face you in a fist fight. Well, it won't deal less damage, but you know what I mean. So I hope so far everything's been clear, but you should get the hang of it if you start experimenting. There's one more thing I'd like to note about that. You should pay attention to the layout of dungeons because in many cases there are obstacles that aren't immediately apparent, but they help you position the enemies in a more favorable setup. It's best to actually experiment and remember which spot to stand at when a wave of enemies spawns to minimize the time you have to spend luring them. Being able to hit all enemies at once can really speed up dungeon runs. And speaking of enemies going after you on spawn, there's one more subject I intended for this video. Let's call it initial aggro. You probably noticed that enemies are rather selective about who they attack when they spawn if you're in a party. Well, I can't be 100% sure, but so far from what I've observed, it all depends on the relative position of players. So for example, in Terminus Machina, spawns will go after the player that stands, from the perspective of entering the dungeon, closer to the entrance and to the left side. I haven't found a general rule that works for all dungeons, but if you start checking it out, you might notice a pattern. Or you can just remember where to stand compared to other players to avoid monsters going after you. Of course, if someone enters a portal faster than the other, the enemies will still likely target the faster player. And if you all start attacking, they'll go after the one that generates the most aggro. Aggro generation mostly depends on damage output. Generally, enemies will go after the player who deals the most damage, but a force shielder can change that with the provocation skill. Also worth noting, and I can't cite the sources here because I can't find the patch notes, but a long time ago when Battle Mode 3 was added to the game, I saw in the patch notes that magic classes generate slightly lower amounts of aggro compared to sword classes, and that Force Shielder and Warrior, the armored classes, generate increased aggro. Gladiator didn't exist back then, but that probably applies to it too. Anyway, I hope this video helps you, and if you have links to the patch notes I mentioned, I'd appreciate if you shared it in the comments. Ahoy!